Okay, since we have a limited amount of time, just an hour here, we'll let people filter in as they will, but we'll just kind of get started, and I'd like to first just kind of kick off with introductions. So if you could, let's just go through and just tell us your name and your hometown, describe your day job and how that might relate to your game designing, and give us a quick description of the game design project that you're currently working on.
Okay, my name is William Reed, hometown Rancho Cordova. Day job, I'm a freelance writer, and it gets me really, I typically write for about Lego. So I'm constantly writing about a project that's typically viewed as fun and toys in a serious way. So gaming is kind of the similar way and transitions well for me for that. Currently, a project I'm working on, In the Ruins, which is an archaeology dice management game.
Okay, I'm Sarah Reed, and yes, we are married. So I'm in Rancho too. My day job's kind of boring, but it reflects my personality. I do research for the state. I like to organize things. I like to research, and that's the kind of half of our game design, although we'll get into that a little bit later. But my personality is I like to organize and research, so that's my day job. But it doesn't really directly have anything to do with board gaming, except board gaming relieves the boredom of my day job. So I'll talk about a different project that we're working on called Until Proven Guilty. It's a take-that style card game where everybody is a criminal. You're all on trial, and the person who wins is the one who can create the best alibi and case so that they get off and everyone else goes to jail. So that's that.
My name is Ben Haskett. I was born and raised here in Sacramento. I work as support staff for an appellate court, which doesn't relate at all to game design, not even a little bit, but it does give me a lot of time to think about it throughout the day, and I do. I have a few game design projects in the cooker, but really my focus right now is on Sarah and Will's In the Ruins. Last year we published a game that they designed called Project Dreamscape, and that was a lot of fun. And so that's I think that's really taking up most of my mental space right now. In the Ruins and Until Proven Guilty.
Cool beans.
Hey, I'm Jonny Pack. I live up in Placerville area, in the foothills out there. It's known as Hangtown. I have a retail day job, which I'm transitioning to bartending soon in gallery direction. I used to own an art gallery, do that sort of thing, so I have more of that in me. I'm a musician, and I think that affects how I think about gaming a lot, actually, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I'm a jazz musician. I like to play structured improvisation. I think that has to do with some real-time decisions, which I might get into. But my favorite thing with board games is European-style board games, and the ones I've been working on right now are American West games, especially like Gold Rush, Pioneer, and things. So it tends to be stuff with like worker placement and action allowance. Got a couple things cooking right now. I don't know what I'm going to do with them in the next year, but I did kickstart Hangtown last year, and I'm still in the process of getting it on tables, which I've been a little slow at.
Hello, I'm Darin Leviloff, and my day job is an attorney, so I do want to check out that alibi game, the evidence game.
I would definitely like the playtesting feedback on that.
I think being an attorney probably helps me a little bit in rules writing. My focus are historical solitaire games, actually, is what I've mostly designed, although my system's been adopted for zombie games and fantasy games, so it's interesting, but I haven't done it myself. And I'm working on a solitaire game on the voyage of the Russian Baltic Fleet in the Russo-Japanese War. So that's all about it.
Very cool. And I'm John Shulters.
I'm from Foster. I'm sorry, from Foster City. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm John Shulters with Black Straw Games. My wife and I run that design business. We're up in Placerville as well, and I'll be moderating today. And again, we'll kind of the structure will just be a few quick questions. We'll kind of go through and get everybody's kind of take on it, and we'll try to keep answers brief and concise and interesting, and wrap things up with enough time to get some Q&A from the audience at the end. So we'll start down at the other end there, and just something that I'm curious about is what, if anything, signified for you the moment when you felt that you made the switch from a design hobbyist into a quote-unquote professional designer, and what do you feel sort of enabled that transition?
Yeah, for me it was a very interesting transition. I still consider myself primarily a game player. I don't, the designer thing was kind of new, and I think in terms of my design, I use, I see game ideas and I use them, and other people use my ideas, so I think that's sort of seamless. I was teaching a Sunday school class at my synagogue and had some ideas for a game on Israel. That was my first game, Israeli independence. And I made it into a classroom game, but it was essentially a solitaire game. And then thought, hey, this is kind of fun. Maybe there's somebody who'd be interested in selling it. Maybe there could be a market for it. I found this company called Victory Point Games, Alan Emmerich, who's just kind of start with new game designers. At the time, it was just games in plastic baggies. Now they've gone to boxes and such. But it looked perfect because we had low sales price. I mean, the game takes about 15 minutes, 8 counters, so it's not a huge involved thing. And then I just kind of expanded from there. One neat little thing is because I'm a game player, every royalty I've ever made from any of my games, I've always gone back and buying games for myself. So it's a neat little thing. The wife doesn't get mad. It all works. Jonny?
Yeah. Well, I've been into board games as a kid a little bit here and there, and then I especially got into them in the mid-2000s through families introduced me to things like Carcassonne and Cantin and some other games. And kind of went knee deep in it, and I got really into it, and ended up having a pretty large collection and really fascinated by the mechanics of it all. And I liked how it challenged my way of thinking. I went from being very right-brain artistic to having to be a little more analytical and having those things feather a little bit, and I thought it had a neat effect, and I was fascinated with that. Then I got into kind of making some prototype stuff, and I fell in with some people that were also making prototypes and things like that, and got picked up by a company actually like right out the gates, and I'll have a beer with you, tell you the disaster story of what it's like to be picked up by a major company. And then after that experience, I decided to stick to things kind of on my own terms, do a Kickstarter, and kind of self-fund, self-promote my project. Now I'm making something that I think of more as a resume piece, like, here, I made this game, and I may try to get back into the industry without being pushed around as much as I was the first time. Then on top of that, I also have a lot of interest in actual game theory, not related to board games, but that dovetails into behavioral economics. And I'm just kind of a big geek for it. I can't say I can do the long, crazy equations myself, but the concepts are really fascinating. And I like the idea of the quality of a decision that people make in life and in board games. There's decisions that none of us like to make, like taxis, and then there's decisions that you like to make as far as picking things out and structuring your identity, all sorts of stuff that are actually really kind of rewarding decisions. So I look at the quality of the decision in a given game as something that is important to me. That's about it.
I have to stop and ask myself, am I a professional or is it still a hobby? I didn't actually start playing board games until I was already an adult. And the first one was Cantin. I guess that's most people's first experience with a proper board game. When I was a kid, I played a lot of Monopoly and stuff like that, but didn't really have an interest in it. After playing Cantin, that led to other, bigger games, Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, all the ones that everybody else is playing. And then I finally had an idea to make my own board game, and I guess kind of got lucky. I got picked up by a publisher right out the gate. It was called Fifth Street Games. I do use past tense on purpose because, fortunately, they did go out of business. It was a one-man company who did most of his stuff through Kickstarter, and things didn't really work out for him. But it was still a really good experience for me. The game was professionally produced. It was called Baldur's Tomb, and got into a lot of stores and sold a lot of copies, and so that was still really exciting. And that's when I was kind of bit by the same bug, and so I designed another game called Tower, and ran a Kickstarter campaign for that, and that was a lot of fun too. But because I have a full-time job, I've always been able to look at game design and game production and even publishing as sort of a hobby, because even if it did go belly up, if it failed and nothing ever came of it, it'd be okay. You know, I'm taken care of. I can approach it as a hobby, and thankfully that even extended into when I published Sarah and Will's game, which also thankfully it did really well.
You got to turn it around.
Oh, yes.
So I'm ever into that. So it's because I approach it as a hobby, I've been able to dip my toes into all these wonderful industries, first as game design and then as a game publisher. And also it's crowdfunding, which is, I feel like that's a hobby all in itself. It's different. It's a different beast, but all of them are just a ton of fun.
I'm like Ben. I still see it as a hobby, not a day job that supports us financially. So again, if this doesn't sell well, although so far it's doing well, but if tomorrow no more copies were ever sold again, I'd be okay, because we do it for fun. Well, Will can tell you his perspective, but I do it for fun. I do it as something I get to do with my husband as a fun activity, and then we get to do it with our friends. And we do a lot of things local, like the artist is also local, Julio Kahara. And so for me, I see it as a social activity where we get to do something very fun and creative, and that breaks up my monotonous life working for the state. So I still see it as a hobby.
For me, I think there is an exact moment where I started thinking more professionally, and it happened at a roundtable pizza when Ben stood up and was like, "Oh my God, we have to make this game."
That'd be this game.
And from that moment on, I started thinking about what I designed differently. Up to that point, I was designing everything. Well, this is for myself. I want to make sure it's a game I want to play, and it was a very centric view. But once that moment ticked over, I started thinking outside myself. Started thinking about games in terms of, well, how will this affect other people? How do those people view these mechanics? And start making decisions on that, as well as making decisions about component costs. Because up to that point, I could make a game as big as I wanted. I could make it 1,000 cards and it'd be perfectly fine. It's not at all feasible in a big market situation unless you have a lot of backers. But when that moment ticked over, it was like, well, now I need to think about what are the restrictions I have? What are the real world applications of this? And so it was more of my perspective of how do I approach this professionally versus this is just fun. And that was the moment for me.
It's all your fault, Ben.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's cool. I can tell kind of the good diversity of people up here with their kind of inspirations and the end products they get to. Us having sort of been relatively new to at least focusing on the industry, kind of made games here and there over the years, but now sort of having it be a more dedicated, directed effort. I'm curious to kind of know, just maybe we can kind of bounce around and describe some of the resources that you all sort of rely on to enrich your own game design knowledge and grow your skills as a designer. Maybe Ben, let's start off.
Okay. I think what I rely on is just playing games with other people. I think that is the biggest source of inspiration. Is I guess playing games on the shelf. I mentioned a couple before. I still love those games and play them all the time. And I think it's the best way to get inspiration for your own game designs. And then going to playtest meetings. A lot of us here, we meet up once a month and we play games for about 4 or 5 hours that we're all working on and designing. One, playing games that other people are designing, I think is just, it's a great way to get perspective, but also bringing your own designs there and getting a lot of real-time feedback is probably one of the most important parts of it.
Well, I know personally that was my experience when I first played Jonny's Hangtown, which just kind of blew me away at the level of sophistication and how all these moving parts fit together. And so I'm interested, Jonny, if you could talk a little bit about sort of where do you go to like draw from the well and kind of broaden your skills?
Well, I guess I'll use a musical metaphor. It's like learning jazz and stuff over the years. You have to have a vocabulary, and you have to kind of go back a bit before you can go forward and see what's contemporary. So I was lucky enough to kind of get in on the European thing right in the mid-2000s when a lot of the games were just coming over. Still VR winners are having to go around was kind of the height of its importing. And so I was able to see a lot of the first generation Euros, and then it was like, cool. And then seeing a lot of the games that were built upon those games, it's like, you go, okay, Puerto Rico exists, then Race for the Galaxy can exist, and then so on and so forth, and things build on each other. And I like to look at the lineage of maybe a given mechanic and see what the, it's like Kalis is the godfather of worker placement games. It might not be the first one, but I wanted to go back and look at why is that one still one that people go back to and might reference, or it's a Waterdeep too, and like what's different in contrast, and what's the appeal of this one versus the difference in another one. So I like that. I have a large collection. I have reservations about what I buy because games are expensive, so I do tend to look at ratings and things like that, or things that just have like a perennial type of thing. So maybe this is on the hotness list right now, and then it comes out and people peter out about it. But then you get these games where it's like they go out of print and you see the copies running for $300, and people going, I need to get that again. And then it say gets kickstarted by a third party or something later on, and then you go, okay, how can I finally snag that? Or you source somebody that has a thing and you go like, oh my gosh, Pete, you have Witch's Brew? We gotta play that. And then, so I make it a point to try to play those games to see what the appeal is with those and to see if it holds up to things that I enjoy. And of course, being in America, going to Gen Con and stuff, I do see a bias towards the American style game, which some people enjoy. So I'm not sure when I go to playtest meetings and stuff, if the people there, it's like, I don't know what's in their collection right now, and so it's kind of, there might be a bias towards one or the other. And I would be fascinated to eventually, like, go to Essen or something like that and meet some of the designers there and see what their process is besides just reading, translated interviews online about how they go about it. But, that's kind of my process, I guess. And I look for, trying to find maybe not developing a brand new mechanic, but seeing like the emergent property of like this mechanic exists and this exists, and this third thing could have never existed without either of those, and it's the integration of those things which might create something fresh for the player.
You have some insight on your process?
For me, I think that the first thing that drives me, because it is such a hobby to me, is the history. And I studied history as an undergraduate. I really love history. And most of my games, will flow from some sort of historical period that I'm interested in. In terms of developing the system that I developed, it's called the States of Siege, and there was a game. I played a lot of historical war games over the years. There was one called East Front Solitaire some years back that probably inspired me the most. And although it was a very difficult game, but it had this idea of sort of, a linear movement, that you were moving along a line. And I said, well, what if you put a center point and the object was almost a tower defense? You defend the center point and your enemies converge. And that's sort of the system. And then I go, well, what in history, how many scenarios in history had that sort of situation? The Russian Civil War was the next one, and I studied a lot of Russian history. But I also looked at criticism that people had. Wargamers and conflict simulation people are very vociferous on their criticisms, and I actually took the criticism of Israeli independence. Some people said, there's not a lot of choice making. I think there is some deceptive choice making, but I was like, okay, so what can I do to make other decisions? So I really used that to my advantage. I took a system out of a game called Axis and Allies, and in my Soviet Dawn game, Red Army Reorganization is a system which is sort of like that, where you get some special perk, you can find the Tsar's gold, or something that will change the dynamics, or the Cheka, which was sort of the forerunner of the KGB. So I think, I just kind of look at different things and go from there, and what I find really neat is it's almost a feedback loop, because a lot of people have now taken my system and used it in their own games. There's a very successful game called Dawn of the Zeds, which takes my historical system and makes zombies attacking. I think it's Centerville. I'm not sure the name of the town. Farmville. I don't know, but it's very interesting, and you're working on an antidote, and I haven't been able to beat it no matter what. I also have this philosophy, because I design solitaire games, that they have to be ridiculously difficult. Because if somebody plays a game in solitaire and wins it right away, they're not going to want to play again. But if they come close or can't seem to beat it, they tend to come back. So.
Sarah and Will, I noticed you guys nodding a lot to all those sentiments. Are those similar kind of ways that you kind of brought
Videos.
Well, of course, playing games and playing more games and then playing more games and then buying more games. So you
And
can play
talking
more
to
games.
other designers.
Yeah, then that's really, really important because that lets you see all the mechanisms, see how they work, see what works for you. Recently, I found a web series on YouTube, Extra Credits, and it's actually designed for video game design. And the interesting thing is, a lot of the core concepts are really based around the same principles that we as board game designers still use. It's just you need to do a little bit of mental gymnastics to translate. So, like for example, an MMO is really a CCG for us. A Hardware Wars is really just more of dealing with component cost. And between that, I started then looking at, well, what's the content that they're talking about? And for example, one video I just recently saw was about the role of a player. Well, from their perspective, the role of a player is they're part of art. And what the game is incomplete art. And I just never had thought about my game being a piece of art that's unfinished, and it needs the player to then give expression and life to. So it's been very enlightening watching, both just binge watching Extra Credits, and then also doing that transposing on what I need and use. And I think it's going to end up making me make some games that I wouldn't have otherwise. Otherwise, what I've been doing up to this point is finding a game mechanics like, okay, I don't like set collection. I don't like take that. Can I make a game that I do like that still is set collection or take that? Yeah, that's where my motivation's been recently.
The other thing I can add is I use the internet as a big resource. As much as Twitter has that restriction on your characters, I've had some fantastic game design discussions on Twitter with other people, other designers, and I guess this goes back to just talking to other designers. For our game design meetings that we meet monthly, part of it is the play testing, but part of it is the first hour. We're typically just talking. We're talking about games, we're talking about game design. We may be talking about the hottest game, but it's helping all of us because we're discussing the mechanisms, the theme, what makes it work, what makes it not work. And so it's just getting outside, because I follow Kickstarter a lot, and I see a lot of failures on there because people isolate themselves. And as a game designer, you need to get out there and get as many people's viewpoints as possible on your game. So even if your game is this style, go and find somebody who doesn't play that style just to see what their perspective. You may dismiss everything they say about it and not use anything, but it helps you grow as a game designer to be able to see other people's perspectives on games. Because that's one of the things I always say, there's so many games in the world because there are so many gamers in the world. And so finding what works for you, I mean, you should always make a game that you enjoy, but it's finding as many perspectives as you can.
I know we rely a lot on, just thanks to the growth of the industry, podcasts that have become way more valuable and informative. A couple that we do regularly is Ludology and Game Design Roundtable. I don't know if you guys want to have any shout outs to other podcast resources you listen to?
I don't listen to a lot of podcasts.
I listen to a lot of podcasts, but
Not game design.
They're all inappropriate. So.
Some of them are game design related. One is, it's kind of weird to say that this is related, but maybe some of you here have heard of a website called the Game Crafter. It's a print-on-demand website where you can design your own games.
I do listen to that.
And they do a podcast every week, and they talk about mostly additions to their website, which seems really self-indulgent at first, but
they really go into a lot of depth about it and how users can use it. And as game designers, I don't know that we all use the Game Crafter, but it is a very valuable resource. So listening to the podcast helps you get further into how you can use the site for yourself. Plus, they've gotten into other topics.
they talk about game design a lot, and sometimes it's like how their pieces can be used for specific games. And a lot of it's just about industry, just about cost involved with things.
I like the one about the 3D printing because they're always trying to explore that, and that is a new hot item. And so they had a whole episode just going into everything they've researched, and that was just so fascinating to see all the research they've done and eliminated various things because it didn't work, but maybe it'll work for somebody else. So yeah, I think that's one's very valuable.
Actually, that jumps really directly to another question I had for all you guys, because I think, Ben, maybe you're the first person that turned me on to the Game Crafter and these print-on-demand services for prototyping, which has been amazing. I mean, we did all this stuff in-house only due to the fact that I had equipment related to my day job that helped me prototype stuff, but now we rely almost solely on companies to help produce prototypes. So maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about kind of your prototyping and playtesting process, and when you feel like when do you make the decision to bring the game out in public, and what stage would your game be at, and what do you try to get it to before you would show it to a publisher or try to Kickstarter? Let's start at okay.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when I developed the system, obviously the first thing is people just naturally start thinking, well, okay, what are other historical situations where you have a surrounded position? And the Alamo, for instance, Kate comes to mind. There's a bunch of others, and so sometimes I've thought about I'll do this idea, and maybe I talk about it, and then sure enough somebody's already done it or is doing it. So I've now sort of changed my approach that I don't really mention the game until it's pretty close to finished. I'm not, just so, because it's not unusual for somebody else to be working on the same thing or come up with the same idea. So that's definitely a concern. In terms of playtesting, I have it really easy because I design solitaire games, so I can playtest pretty well just myself. Obviously, at some point I give it over to Victory Point Games and they have a development crew and they work on it, but usually by the time they get it, it's somewhat of a workable game, and I don't need to do anything beyond what they do for me. I'd also wanted to mention in terms of there's a YouTube, a guy Marco Arnudo, who does game reviews, and he was a big fan of one of my games, and that really kind of put me on the map. And I actually met him because he's a professor at Indiana University, and I have a son who goes there. So that was an interesting thing. He does game reviews, and I got to play a game with him. And he has a very broad base because he's historical, but some of them are more toward the Euro. Mark Wallace's Gettysburg, etc.
Let's see. Well, back when I ran an art gallery, I also had a matting area, so I could mat frame things. So that was really useful for actually cutting cardboard, which was useful, and how to bevel edges and all that. And I have a photo printer and sticker paper and its spray adhesives and a big bucket of every little bit you could possibly need, this color, that color, name it, and dice of different sizes. So I just have kind of a little workshop of stuff. Good paper cutter, which is good for cutting cards, and lots of sleeves so you can pop things in and out. But I like to start simple at this point with just construction paper and Sharpies, and just try to get ideas down before I even try to do stuff on a computer or anything like that. Sometimes I'll bring it out for some kind of a closed playtest with some people I trust. The lounge I work at, sometimes the entire building is chalkboard, and the last prototype I had, I didn't actually have a board ready. I just went there about an hour early and drew the board on chalk on the table, and we played on this chalkboard table with some makeshift bits I had, and it's kind of cool to be like, oh, that doesn't work, and erase it and fix it in real time, and then go home, take notes of what was there, take a photo of it, and be like, okay. And that game I've just now gone into the next phase, which is construction paper. So I went from chalk to construction paper, and at some point I'll considered moving into another stage, kind of upgrading as I go. Prior to kickstarting Hangtown, I tried to make the prototype as close to the production copy because I didn't actually get a Game Crafter version or anything. And so what appeared on the Kickstarter video and pictures, I wanted to look basically, it's like you can't tell if this is a game or not. And I found things that were very, 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 very close. And so it's kind of one of those things. So I can get a game up to that point. I'm not actually a graphic designer, so I do need to outsource a little bit to get people to do things I can't do. But with my basic skills and vision, I try to bring it up to that point without being like, hey, I got this idea and look at this chalkboard, will you give me money? So, so I kind of go the whole arc and see what's appropriate. Like, this is just a rough idea, therefore it's a rough prototype. And if I'm like dead set on it, I'll go the extra mile. So, that's about it.
You amongst yourselves.
Well, when I first got interested in game design, I just happened to come across the Game Crafter. And so pretty much since the first time I had an idea for a game, I've been getting my prototypes made through them, which has been remarkably convenient. There have been a few times where just in a pinch I've had to print off like 54 cards and cut them out and sleeve them. And it's felt like the most painstaking process ever because I'm in the process of just hitting a few keys and ordering something. I do have a hobbyist background in graphic design, so that did help a little bit. I was able to put prototypes together myself. When I did have to outsource for art, I was able to just get like the raw art pieces, bring them into Photoshop, and get everything put together that way. And so when it comes time to actually make a game and produce a game, before I started outsourcing to like Chinese manufacturers, I was like, how can I format this game to fit the Game Crafter's like components that they have? So I'd be like, well, they have a quad-fold game board, okay, I can use that, maybe I can use the chits and the cards. And now I would say that in the last year I've transitioned more to, I guess, a publisher hat, taken off the game design hat a little bit and put on more of a publisher hat, and I look to their designs. And so my thought process is all about what's the smallest box I can get, how many components can I get in there, how can I make sure that everything's still really high quality while still making things as inexpensive as possible. And that's usually where my thought process is. And especially with crowdfunding through Kickstarter, I always have to think like with some stretch goals in mind. So all the games that I want to come out, I eventually want them to all be in really thick boxes with thick, nice cards and unfinished and stuff. And that's a lot of my a lot of where my priorities are.
For us, I'll let Will start because he's the beginning point of most of our game design.
Yeah, because of my vision, I have really relied on my...
Legally blind.
Yeah, I'm legally blind, so I've really relied on my brain, and I tend to design everything in my brain to the point where I feel it works, which, in comparison to some of the people we've helped and had, I'm kind of like 3 or 4 steps beyond where they are with their first prototype.
He's very mathematically inclined.
So by the time I put anything to paper, it's been play tested several times in my head, and then I get Sarah to start doing the
he'll
development.
like tell me like a few things like, hey, I got a new idea, and he might ask me a few things like he'll bounce a few concepts off me, and then he goes back to his thing, and I don't hear from like a week or so later, or sometimes it's 2 days, depending on how fast his process is.
Also depends how big the game is.
Yeah, so smaller games, he's like, okay, the next day, here's everything. So he'll write it up in very rough form on a Word document. I'll take that, and I'll start constructing that into the first draft of our rules, and then from there looking at the components. The very first time we did the game design, I started researching, I ran across the Game Crafter too. That was the first thing that we used. More recently, we have started doing some in-house because we got a better printer. We can print on cardstock now. So we do some things now, but for a long time it was all Game Crafter, so we'd always fit whatever they're publishing.
And we've also tried a few other companies. There's a board game maker.
Yeah.
We got these, they're white dice, and they're just printed.
Yeah, you can print sides on the white dice, so that's nice for custom dice.
It was very affordable.
So,
also found a site in Canada who actually does custom acrylic laser cut
Pieces.
and it was extremely affordable because the exchange rate between us and Canada is great.
But so typically, we'll make a prototype. He and I will play test it quite a lot before we ever take it to the game design group to get more feedback. And then I've done blind play testing where I find people on the internet and I'm like, hey, would you play test this if I send it to you? So we also do a lot of that. We'll send it out. And then, we work with Ben a lot so that he does the end production side.
Our game design meetings are really interesting because a lot of us, we will get a rough design in our head and just, hey, let's bring it to the meeting. And we'll set it up and it will fail miserably, like a slow car crash that takes like an hour to play. And so it is really interesting, like watching Will bring his designs because he's right. So much of the playtesting initially is just in his head. He works out a lot of the things that people run into early. And so when he brings a game to a meeting for the first time, it almost feels like it's already halfway there. Yeah. So it is really exciting.
But I will say Ben has beautiful prototypes.
You make things look really awesome.
It's depressed him before.
So it's like a DeLorean. If it gets in a car accident, it's still going to be okay. Everyone's going to die, but it's so pretty.
Question about the game mechanics. I know in computer design, a lot of times they will design the mechanics of things and then put in the content later. Mm-hmm. So instead of it being this is an orc, it's just basically a square with orc written on it, or monster A, monster B, so that if they wanted to design some mechanics, they can design the mechanics and then not have the content, not worry about the content, and then someone else designs the content. When you do the same thing, show up with just the design mechanics of a game, to run the mechanics through to see how the mechanics work, and not actually have what the game is even about. It's just the mechanics.
Definitely.
Well, typically, I would say for us, we will try to get at least basic icons. Icons or something to represent what the card is. If you come in with just scribbles on a piece of paper, it's really rough to get through. So we will use like icons.net, Clicker. We'll just try to grab some free things, free art, so that there's something on there so because people connect better when there's something visual there to spark their imagination. So those who've done that usually get some better playtesting. Of course, not everyone does, so if someone comes in with just handwritten scribbles, we work through it, but it is harder at that initial stage to get into the thematics of the game. Now, if all they're worried about is does this work mechanically, then that's fine. We can work with just scribbles on pieces of paper. But the more art, but on the other hand, Ben's have the opposite reaction where he makes his look so good, it looks like a finished product, and then it fails miserably. Everybody's like, why is this not working? Because it looks like a finished game. So you have to balance not making it look so good, because then people have a preconceived notion that the game is farther along than it really is.
I think it also depends on where your design goals are. Because you can design based on an experience, which mechanics then trump most everything, or narrative, where in that case, you really want that orc there. So put the orc there and then derive mechanics from it.
Yeah, but typically don't pay for an artist until you know this thing's going to get published.
That's
Yeah.
This is probably a time to point out, one of the things, when you look at a game, any kind of game or play, there's all these different concepts. We're talking about agon. What's the contest? What's the competition? Then there's the layout. What are the actual rules, the mechanics? How are you making it click? And then there's the mimesis. There's the I want it to be an orc. No, I want it to be the Red Baron. No, I want it to be orc as a Red Baron in disguise. And then there's just the like I got to kick his butt. And those four elements are completely distinct.
Right.
And each one of those, and you can do in the R&D work, is isolate. In fact, if you don't isolate those four things, you're going to be vulnerable to not understanding your critique of when a car crashes. When the car crashes, you won't know why, because might be all of them. Might be like, this is stupid, don't do it. It could be the yeah, no, it's dumb, right? But or it could be one thing. And Sarah and I were just talking earlier today. Their legal game was conceived in an entirely different narrative milieu. The mechanics changed not at all, but they changed
the theme,
the narrative, the through line, and the mimesis, the storytelling part of it changed entirely, and it flipped the game into something that was much more successful, both for them and for their playtesters and eventually their players. So if you can separate those 4 concepts out, what happens is then you can, but then it goes back to then their play testing can then isolate one of those 4 elements. Say, hey, I don't even know what this is going to be for yet, but I got this new rule. What if you took
A and B plus C
and
Yeah.
did that, right?
Yeah.
Which is what I'm sorry, your name again is
Darren.
What Darin was talking about. He said, hey, I saw this rule, and I'm like, I wanted to try that. Or and then Jonny was in the same way, where he says, hey, I've seen rule A and rule B. What if you put A plus B?
Yeah.
Is that work, or is that, I know? And so you can isolate one of those 4 elements just to see if it appeals. And if it does, click, go on to the next one. Does that appeal? Click. But in Will's case, what he's saying is he tries to get all 4 of those things conceptualized together, runs them through, gives them his own shakedown cruise in his head before he puts it to anybody.
Right.
But that's his choice. That's not necessary.
Right.
It depends on who you've got as a feedback mechanism.
A follow-up question, because this is also related. If you've played The Lords of Waterdeep and you've played Agricola, those games are very, very similar. They're both, resource management, worker placement games, very similar in their aspects. What are the rules on like fair use or that kind of thing? Is it a very murky? Are we stepping into a really murky?
There's
kind
no
of
way to
copyright.
have mechanics
Hey, as long as
whatsoever.
as long as the game mechanics are
As long as you're not trying to call your game Lords of Waterdeep,
right.
you're fine.
The Lords of Waterdeep?
Right.
Yes.
Lords of
Yeah.
Waterdeep. Oh, okay.
In general, no one has been able to successfully copyright mechanisms.
Okay.
It's why there are so many deck builders. It's
Right.
why there's so many worker placement. There's
resource management,
social
blah, blah.
games. You cannot
Like trying to
you
copyright
cannot
the
copyright because the whole thing is what's the
Fair use.
yeah it is because
Is it a fair use thing?
when you're trying to copyright it has to be an invention or I'm trying to remember
An
the
expression like the pop
Patent.
bubble. You can
Yeah.
you can do mousetrap with the gizmos, and you can
Yeah.
copyright your graphics and a bunch of other things, but you can't really say this is my intellectual property except for if somebody literally did a knockoff of your
Yeah.
through
Yeah,
your
the same exact game.
The
someone else came up
closest
with.
one, which you might not have heard of, is Ungard and Serlin's what was it, Flash Duel, was basically just a reskin, and the board game community just really came down on him. And Cantin, who designed the first one, was just like, "That's my game, and you put a skin on it. Like, shame on you." And this guy's an independent publisher, and he basically throws a little finger to the world, saying, "I'm gonna do whatever I want. I don't care about distribution. You buy it from me, and if you like it, you like it." And he was real. There's a weird situation. That's the only one I've heard of somebody really almost admitting to it and saying, "What are you going to do about it?"
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point is that the board game community is really strong. And I like, for me, I go on Twitter and I talk about it. Oh, God, what's the guy on Twitter that, Daniel Solis. Daniel Solis does all his game design on Twitter. He puts everything out there. He's not afraid if someone's going to steal his idea because in the gaming community, if someone's made a game and someone else comes around and tries to copy it like exactly, the community is going to come around the original creator and support them, and it's kind of a balancing act. It's kind of a balance system with the community itself. So that's why for me, I'm never worried about putting my designs out there. I go onto Board Game Geek and I go into the design forum and I'm like, here's my rules, can someone check this? And here's the card, you can download them from my Dropbox and play test them. And if they decide to go and make a copy of it, I don't really care. You know?
Well, I think it's a fairly new development, right, in the
That's
industry that we all have this sort of ability to communicate globally and share ideas rapidly and have demonstrable proof of a creation date on a particular thing.
Yeah.
Timestamp is the date.
Yeah. So I think, Darin, you mentioned that you tend to kind of keep your ideas reserved before showing them publicly or discussing them. Is that maybe a wargaming specific thing, or?
Well, I think that could apply to, in terms of anything. I mean, it seems to me, my son's a Eurogamer. I dabbled with him. I played Ticket to Ride and Lords of Waterdeep and things like that. And I think a lot of those games have similar ideas, similar concepts. Gold Rush, economic management of it could be Puerto Rico and it could be Cuba. So I think the same ideas could go into that. One thing I was thinking in terms of the system is one thing that I think is really nice about the company I work with, Victory Point Games, is he labeled my system States of Siege, and I guess that's trademarked. In fact, I don't have the rights to my own system, but I guess I have the rights to my games.
His name is on it.
Yes. But in any event, you know, there are other designers have come in, you know, maybe brand new designers, design games using my system. And, you know, I'm not saying I get a lot of money, but I get a little bit of royalty. I get, you know, as a systems designer. And I think that's kind of a nice thing. I don't think he had to do that. I think that was, and I've noticed that there's some games on the market that seem to have some blendings. There was a game I played called Yggdrasil that some people say is very similar to my design. I don't know. But at the same time, I use other people's designs in my design. So, you know, it's all seemed fair, and in some ways, I consider it flattery. There's a game designer, Joe Miranda. He does most of the magazine games for Strategy and Tactics magazine. He's done a few games using my system, and I've played literally 100 of his games. So it's like this is the greatest, you know, flattery for you know, my little, you know, consumer to have someone else use my system. So
we're starting to run towards the end of the hour. I'm going to jump ahead to the last question, and then we can kind of open up to some more general specific questions too. But I think what comes up in a lot of game design panels and discussions and classes and seminars and all that is the nature of publishing, getting your idea out into the world. And it seems like we've got a good variety of how people have approached that. So I'm wondering that just if you have run or participated in sort of a crowdfunding project or worked with or worked for publishers, kind of what personal lessons did you learn from that process that surprised you, that you didn't really know going in, and that you think would be kind of beneficial for others to know about?
Well, as someone who's self-published once and then published Sarah and Will's game Project Dreamscape, I would say the biggest thing to look out for, especially if you're approaching it as a hobby, is that tax season is going to come, and it's going to be way more complicated than your taxes have ever been. I think Kickstarter does this thing at the end of each year. They send you a 1099-K, and it's a simple letter. There's hardly anything on it. It says, "We just want you to know that we told the IRS that we gave you $49,000. The rest is up to you." And I don't think I slept more than 2 hours for a week because I was just nervous. But there was nothing to worry about. I just did my taxes, and I was honest. I think Barry's over there. I talked to him about it because I was just a sobby mess. I was just like, "What am I going to get audited? They're going to take my house away. I'm going to lose my kid." You know, but it was terrifying.
Slavery.
Right.
Although I think the answer I had was just, do your best and try not to get audited. Yeah, be as honest as you can be.
Yeah, and that's what I did. I just kept receipts and I filed my taxes, and it never came up. They just said, "Here's your tax return. Have a nice day." And it was just like, I don't know what I was sitting at. But it is a really scary thing, especially if you've never done a lot of freelancing before and had extra income. I always had the government, because I have a state job too, take out all my taxes, and I just, I did TurboTax every year. And I still ended up doing TurboTax. I just bought it for small business, and it was no big deal. So that's the thing to be aware of. And then the second thing is remembering that the 30 days where you crowdfund is only just the tip of the iceberg. After you get and even manufacturing, getting the games to you, is just the tip of the iceberg. I had 1,200 backers with Tower, and I made 2,000 copies, and I had 800 copies left over. And it was a year later, and it was like, great, now I've got 800 copies to sell, and I didn't do anything. I just felt like I was just living off this zeitgeist, and these copies were just going to go into retail, and people were going to buy them, and nobody did. But I never even said anything about it. I don't know what I was thinking, but Kickstarter, it's just different. You put your idea out there, and if one person sees it and runs with it, then all of a sudden you're just like the star of the moment. But when you're just some dude with 800 boxes that you want to sell, no, you're just some dude. Who cares? And so that was really difficult. And I learned my lesson and found out that you only have to do very little. With Project Dreamscape, it's selling a lot more, but I'm not doing that much more. I'm giving away free copies to like contests, and we sent out a bunch of review copies, and then finally I have a Facebook page, and I run an ad on it like once a month.
You got into distribution as well. That was the trick.
I got into distribution with Tower too in the same way. We're hooked up at the same distribution partner. But the guy's like, "What do you want me to do?" I offer it to them, and if they want to buy it, they buy it. If they don't, they don't. But because I never even made even the slightest effort with pushing Tower out there after I'd gotten it manufactured, it just sat there. It did work out. I ended up selling most of the copies to like a monthly game box company, and not at a loss either. So it worked out, but it was almost like a very scary, like, I'm going to be that guy with a bunch of copies of his own games in his
Sitting
attic.
in his garage.
Yeah, just collecting dust, and I'll eventually, use them as packing peanuts. So that didn't happen, but I would say those are the two biggest lessons. You have to be like a super grown up adult at some point and do your taxes and actually like take care of all of the back end. And two, you have to work at selling those games after you get it made.
Johnny, do you have any other things to add to that?
Well, my Kickstarter, my plan was to self-fund part of it, so I didn't have any gravy to report as far as that goes, and I've also self-published a music theory book a few years ago, and I get 1099 for teaching music lessons, a lot of things, and performances, so I'm really used to self-income coming in as far as that goes, and I'm used to getting gouged, and I never get a return, so that just kind of fell into place with things I'm okay with, and like, okay, that's just how that works. I do have 600 games sitting there, but I just got my shipment in right before Christmas, basically, last year, and I've done very, very little to put it out there besides sending out a couple review copies, literally just a handful. This is the first convention I've attended that actually had inventory. I went to RageCon last year with pre-release copies to show that, but I didn't actually have any in the back of my car. I'd be like, hey, we're in the parking lot. So I'm probably going to get into the point pretty soon where I'm going to build a cover letter. Just send them out to people, just get them on tables and see where it goes and get out more a little more.
You're always selling CDs out of the back of your trunk.
Yeah, used to that too, right? So so that kind of thing for sure. And I don't particularly like the kickstarting process. I can't say I get excited about it. Prepping for it's a lot of work. It's 2, 3, 4 weeks of anxiety, and then you got a lot of messages and things to take care of, and then queuing up the manufacturing is a lot of work. And like you said, you got to kind of grow up about it and be like, okay, it's all business now. The creative playtesting and all that fun stuff is long in the past. You realize you're manufacturing this game, you haven't played it for 4 months because you're just dealing with numbers and calls and emails and all that other side of things. So that's one thing. And the other half is I do have a local market because it's historically themed around the Gold Rush, and it's named Hangtown, which is Placerville's nickname. And so I do have a kind of built-in audience, and local retailers really like it. The hotel and the historic newsstand and the historic society, I sell more copies that way than I do online at this point. The mix is that these people have never encountered a Euro game except for maybe Cantin at best, and so they're thinking that this is a reskin of Monopoly, and they open it up, and they've never played worker placement, they don't know what a tableau builder is, they haven't played Seven Wonders, all this, and they're going like, what? So when I show people in town that I try to demo as much as possible, I'm really breaking them in with a heavyweight Euro, which is not a good gateway game, and it's a little bit abrupt. Luckily, there's a lot of historic photos and stuff in there, so just as a collector's piece, I go, it looks cool. And it's got 450 really cool little parts in a heavy box. I get my $50 worth.
And they probably don't know about Board Game Geek, so
no,
it's not like they
Board Game
can.
Geek, so I get peer reviews.
Yeah.
The review company that I did send it to right away was the one up in Canada, Bored to Death, and they have their little TV channel, and they were really ecstatic about it. Gave it like an 8.5 out of 10. And they're harsh critics. I was glad they didn't have trouble with the rules at all. In fact, they said, one of the best things about it is it was streamlined rules. I'm like, thank you.
That's hard. That's hard to do.
Because that's one thing. Is again with the A, B, C type idea we mentioned there. I think that third tier right now is streamlining rules, and they're seeing a lot of games where you look at Dominion pops out, you see all this other stuff, and then you see Star Realms come out, which streamline the heck out of all that stuff and puts it in a portable little box, and it blows up and makes a great app. So you go, cool, and you see Seven Wonders. It's a wonderful game. You see a lot of people not understanding the iconic language, and you see Sushi Go pop up and end up in Target, and boom, like the same mechanics, but integrated in a way that is a perfect gateway game. And then they can then turn to Seven Wonders, which is not too hard to get, and they'll be ready for it. And I think that's definitely something right now, like the zeitgeist, is to make good streamlined gateway games. And I'd say Hangtown's not.
Well, we've got maybe about 5 minutes left. If we can turn it over, and if anyone out here has some more specific questions for the panelists, we can do that.
So when you're going, especially first time, you just made a game, you say, hey, this is something maybe I could sell. You're like an unknown in the industry at that point. You don't have the crowdfunding. How do you take that next step, like that first step to getting from a publisher or soliciting a reviewer and having them say, sure, I'll review a game? Like, what's the best or what's
Well,
worked
if
for
you're
you?
going to go the publisher route, you have to research the publishers. And I guess this is where, again, my personality really comes out, is you just doing the research. Because there's a lot of publishers right now, and I think that's why a lot of us are doing self-publishing. A lot of publishers right now are not accepting submissions, or if they are, you have to go to the conventions. And I mean Gen Con and Origins, you have to go to the big conventions. And that's been one of our biggest challenges, is being unable to go to those, so we've had to turn to self-publishing. But do your research. So if company A, they make a lot of this style game and your game is this, and it doesn't match up, they're not going to be very likely to want your submission, because it's going to cost you to send a game to them. So you don't want to waste your money, you don't want to waste their time. Otherwise, I really believe in social networking. Getting on Twitter, getting on Board Game Geek, getting on Facebook. There's dozens of design groups, and just pick people's brains. And the more you get to know people and the more people get to know you, then you'll be able to find your niche. And I mean, that's how we found Ben. We were just going to be hobby designers for the rest of our lives. We're like, we'll just put it on Game Crafter and it's done. But because of our networking locally, Ben's like, hey, no, I'm going to help you publish this. So it's getting in there and meeting more people. That's the biggest thing.
I do think
And
that's
cons,
the biggest thing.
going to cons.
Yeah.
Just playing.
Which
with
is
everybody
another,
is hard.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
But
IRL version of social networking.
Yes. Well, for those of us, so for me,
Right.
I have some physical issues, so my health issues prevent me from going to a lot of conventions. And Will's vision issues also make it difficult. So for us, we've relied a lot on the internet.
Right.
It makes it more difficult. It'll be a lot easier if you can go to conventions. Go to conventions, find out if they're doing like an unpub type of area, get it in there.
Or small meetup groups or other, I mean, it doesn't have to, Gen Con's certainly one to go to, but
Yes.
it could be ones like this or smaller or,
Yeah.
you know.
For me, it's helped that I'm a hobbyist myself, so I'm in tune with what's going on in the community because I'm a member of the community. I think I'm in a very different position than the rest of the people here in that I don't self-publish. I'm horrible at graphic design. In fact, my Israeli game originally was on 22 index cards and a legal pad of paper. That was the game. That was the prototype. I feel like I've got a pretty busy life. I've got a full-time job. I've got kids. And I don't want to devote myself to marketing. I don't want to I do some marketing, but I don't want to devote myself to that or production. And it helps that someone else is helping me develop these games, and I don't have to do that myself. I more rely, and I just fell in randomly. What happened was there was a European company called UGG that had a contest that was looking for a game that used about, 16 cards. And I said, well, I got a game that uses 22, would you be interested? And they said, well, not for our contest, but we'd be interested in this. And they sat on it for like a year, and nothing was happening. At some point, they were putting out some game on the Roman Empire, and they just said, if you want to market elsewhere, that's fine, And then I go to this website, Consim World, and there was a new company, and I'm familiar with Alan Emmerich, who was the principal of the company, and they were, publishing pretty much, print-on-demand games, and I said, well, this looks perfect. So I brought it to him. Luckily, his partner at the time hated it, thought it was, this is nothing, this won't do anything. He loved it, thought, he quoted, quote-unquote, lightning in a bottle, and he went with it, and it was very successful, and then I started doing more, and then other people started doing more, so, it's just a matter of luck. I will say that, my son gets on me because, obviously the cut I get is not substantial in relation to the overall profit of the product and those kind of things, but, I have to have sort of this heart-to-heart that this is a hobby for me. This isn't about, making $10,000 or $1 million. This is about people playing my game, people enjoying my game, and seeing my game out there. When I go to a hobby store at Game Castle in Santa Clara, saw my game on the shelf. That's cool, So that's where I'm at.
You guys know Brian Tiernan's book about game design. He worked on Seattle, and his closing comments about that are always the same. And you hear him talking, and he was the same way. He says, He worked with Wizards for a long time, and he says, hard business to make $1 million at. That's true, but if you do a game and you sell 500 copies, and that's all you ever did with it your whole life, you know what you just did? You made 500 people and their friends really happy for however long it took to play the game. How many people can say that?
Yeah.
So don't worry about. So as long as you're not losing your shirt, don't think of it as your nut you're going to make your mint on. But if that's your reward, if that's a good reward for you, you're in the right business. Which is really nice. That was one of the simplest ways of putting it that I've heard, and it's true for a lot of other art forms as well. But it's very well set for games, I thought.
I think that's a good sentiment to wrap up on. I think most of us will be around for the rest of the day if you have other questions.
Just wanted to point out that anybody who wants to come and play test, either have your own design or just help play test others, our group's called the Gamers Grind Playtesting, and we have a group on Facebook, so you can search it and just ask to join. We're trying to get better at posting to the meetup for the Sacramento board game group as well. But that's my just little pitch there.
And you want your Facebook group, your designers?
Yeah, there is a group specifically for designers in the Northern California region to coordinate on events and activities and playtesting groups. It's called GREAT, which is the
Great
Game Makers
Inc.
Regional Event and Testing in Northern California. GREAT Incorporated. So you can find that on
Even
Facebook
the
as
ink
well.
is part of the acronym.
Just the Inc. not all of Incorporated.
It's great ink.
There's a lot of
Like a
resources
tattoo
out there, as everyone said.
Yeah.
And in general, almost everyone you meet is going to be very friendly and approachable, so don't be afraid to say hello. So, thanks again to everybody, all the
Thank
panelists.
you.
And let's go play some games.